Hello and welcome to the video. In this video I'd like to go through some of the tips and tricks to install a diversity setup into your FatShark goggles. Now for the demonstration today I'm actually going to use this thing here. This is the Rx5808. I'm not sure if that's how you say it, but it is their version of the Rx5808 Pro Diversity system. Now the way this works, if I open the box, you actually have two modules. You have a main module that includes the controls and the OLED to show you how everything's working, let you navigate the menus, and on the other end you have another remote receiver, and that remote receiver has the second antenna on it, and the whole thing is connected by this cable. You'll have spotted already the reason that I like this one is twofold really. One is it actually includes covers that cover up the different boards as you install them into your FatShark goggles. I have a couple of other diversity setups here. Here's one for example that is supplied and doesn't come with any covers at all, but you'll notice that the boards look quite similar. That's because an awful lot of the diversity setups out there at the moment are based on this same project using the Rx5808. The other thing I quite like is the fact that the cable is white. Now we'll talk about how to put it in a second, but having the white cable means that if you mount it externally it doesn't look too bad at all. Now we've played with other diversity systems already on the channel. We haven't done a lot of internal stuff. There are other YouTubers who spend a lot of time talking about that. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about diversity, then we have the other videos about the standalone, very large multi-array systems, which are fantastic for flying at distance. And we also have had a quick look in the past at the FatShark module itself. Now the FatShark module is installed here in my Dominator V3s. This is only antenna diversity on this though, not true diversity. And it's a question I get asked a lot, so let me just very quickly explain the difference between the two. So in true diversity what you have is what we've got here with this Rx5808. What you have is you have two completely physically separate FPV receivers with their own associated connector for the antennas. Now what that means is that both of those signals are being fed along to the main unit along with their RSSI signal strengths and some of the pieces as well, and what the main receiver is doing is it's picking the FPV signal that has the best RSSI value. Now the code is usually a little bit more advanced than that. It's not just simply on the RSSI, it's also checking things like how stable the video frame is and other pieces as well to make sure that it's not just locking onto a really strong spurious signal, which would be great for the RSI, it's trying to give you the best image in your goggles. In antenna diversity doesn't have all of that additional complexity. What it's really doing is trying to figure out between two locally connected antennas which is the best one, and in the worst cases what it's actually doing is smudging both of those signals together in order to try and give you the best of both worlds. But in reality it means that if there's interference on one antenna, there's a very good chance that interference is going to make it through into your goggles. So true diversity, where you have two receivers, two antennas and some good solid technology in the middle to make sure that you are always getting the FPV image from the antenna with the strongest reception, is the way to go. So I'm going to pop this into the HD3s here, and let's first of all talk about physical fit. Now we've talked about the pieces already. We have the main OLED, we have the auxiliary or separate receiver, and we have the wire that goes together. Both of these are covered in these cases. The cases aren't a 100% wonderful fit. They're pretty close, but when they're on and they're fitted, they shouldn't move around too much at all. So you are going to have to test fit everything in here before you put it together. You do have to think about the bay size. Now, in front of us here, we have the new FatShark Attitude V4s. These V4s will allow you to mount this stuff internally. The challenge that you've got is the bay size in these are slightly smaller than in the Dominator V3s and the HD3s. So if you have something like these Attitude V3s or Attitude V4s with a smaller bay, then you're really at the moment only limited to the FatShark antenna diversity module, but I'm hoping that we'll see other modules from other manufacturers, who knows, maybe even FatShark, that will give us that kind of diversity setup in these smaller goggles. So now we've got that out of the way, let's actually have a look at how this stuff is going to plug into these two modular bays in these larger style of goggles from FatShark. First thing to be aware of is you can't install the diversity stuff in these goggles if you already have an internal head tracker. Now if I take the cover off our Dominator V3s, here is the Trinity head tracker installed. Now we've done a video on the Trinity head tracker, how it's set up and how it all works, so if you want to go and have a look at that, it will explain how. But what it does mean is that if you have this additional board inside this bay, then unfortunately there isn't going to be space in here for you to put the second receiver out of the way. The other thing to think about is there is this little 3.5-inch jack here that can get in the way of the second receiver unless it's trimmed properly. So if I try it with this other DIversity setup, you can see that this board is a little bit of a bugger to get in the position. Now you could potentially very carefully take a little bit of material off the edge of the board. Typically there aren't traces towards the very edge, but you do want to make sure and test fit everything. These boards might not be completely cropped to the right size. Even with the Holybro product that we're using here, it only just fits in. So rather than me trying to have to fit this in where I'm going to be able to snap it in with the receiver and the case and the associated cover in one step, I'm probably going to have to seat the receiver first and then clip the case over the top. Cable routing can be internal or external. There are videos out there that show you how to take your goggles apart, clip little bits of plastic out the way so you can mount this cable out the way. Personally, because I'm already going to have these two whacking bits of plastic cover, and I wish these had been white, it would have been lovely if they'd have been available as white that match the goggles, but the fact that they're black is going to make it look a little bit messier anyway. The fact it's got a nice white cable, and I'll twist this up so it's neat between the two modules, I think isn't a problem. I'd rather keep the cable external and then have the ability, if something starts to go wrong with the goggles, to be able to pull the modules out and send it back to FatShark to get it sorted. One trick though, on the back of some of these modules, some of the pins where they've been soldered haven't been clipped very short. If you have a set of decent side cutters, my tip would be just go through and just trim off any excess leads that are poking through the back, particularly on the daughter board. This is how the Holybro daughter board looked when I first started to test fit this. I've snipped all of those pins off and it makes it much easier to seat. So now we've got that in place, let me go away and plug this all in and we'll come back. I'll give you some tips on the antenna calibration. So here it is, all installed, complete with my painless 360 sticker. So in any of these DIversity systems, particularly those based on the Rx5808, we do need to do calibration to calibrate the RSSI value. The default RSSI values and the sensitivity of these two receivers that we've just installed in these goggles will be very slightly different. We do need to go through a calibration test so that the main unit can figure out what the standing RSSI is, so it has an accurate baseline for when it needs to do the switching between the two modules. Now the way we do this is we don't install any antennas. We're going to use the SMA receivers without anything in. That isn't a problem. You're allowed to run receivers for FPV kit without antennas installed. It's transmitters that you should always make sure that you have an antenna plugged into. So what we're going to do is we're going to power up an FPV signal remotely. Ideally you want it kind of 10-15 feet away, and then with your kind of goggles facing in that direction you need to hit the calibrate button and let it go through the calibrate process. Once it's finished the calibration process, then you can pop your antennas on. Now one thing we'll be looking at in another video shortly is this stuff here. Now as you know, we're quite a big fan of Menace RC anyway, but the guys have just released a new kit that allows you to get all the pieces for a DIversity setup like this in one little box, and it's an economical way to get all the bits that you need in one purchase. So I'm going to put the patch antenna on one side on these goggles, and I'm going to put one of these pagoda antennas on the other side, and then I'm ready to fly. So hopefully that helps those of you that have been thinking about maybe getting a DIversity setup. Some of the tips and tricks and some of the things to help you avoid the pitfalls that you occasionally get into when you're trying to fit this stuff. Thank you for taking the time to watch that video. We try and release at least 2 videos a week, usually a quick tip on a Tuesday and a more in-depth video on a Friday, and sometimes we manage to get a few more out as well. If you're interested in radio control, then the playlists are useful to have a look at. Anything that's called Introduction To is an organised set of videos that teach you from first principles about the subject that you're interested in. But we also have information about the majority of popular open source flight controllers, how to build quadcopters, fixed wing models, reviews, setups, unboxing, all kinds of things in here as well. So if you haven't already had a look at the playlist, then I'd recommend going and having a look through here to see if there's anything that takes your fancy. Finally, we do also provide updates through things like Twitter, Instagram, and also post all of our 3D designs on Thingiverse as well. So if you like what we're doing here on YouTube, have a look at those things and subscribe to us there, and you'll find out what we're up to in advance of the videos coming out here on the channel.